My name is Marjorie, and I am 65 years old. As a retired funeral director, I dedicated 40 years to compassionately guiding grieving families through their darkest hours. I built a secure life filled with dignity and respect. After remarrying Arthur 25 years ago, I devoted myself completely to our warm home, nurturing our marriage with every fiber of my being, embracing his children, Robert and Brenda, as my own. I believed we shared sacred values of family unity and respect. I cherished every precious moment, never imagining the deceit that lurked beneath the surface. Then, Arthur suddenly passed away. Robert, his son, immediately forbade me from attending his funeral. He publicly accused me of being a gold digger, an abusive stepmother, orchestrating a monstrous narrative that painted me as a villain. He planned to claim Arthur's entire $500,000 life insurance policy for himself. "You're a monster, Marjorie. You have no humanity." Robert screamed at me, his face twisted with rage. Arthur's family publicly shunned me. My identity, my love for Arthur, my right to mourn, all brutally stripped away in an instant. My heart shattered as I faced complete financial ruin. Yet as despair threatened to consume me, a funeral director's unwavering drive for dignity and legal precision ignited a cold fury within me. What Robert Brenda Arthur's family, Mr. Thompson and Mr. Davies, didn't know was my secret, Arthur's final, legally binding will leaving everything solely to me, and hundreds of photos, emails, and video clips proving our loving relationship. My loyal pastor, a retired judge, waited patiently. This time, their insidious cruelty wouldn't just unravel. It would expose their blatant fraud, reclaim my rightful place, and honor Arthur's true legacy, proving that truth triumphs over malice. The morning after Arthur's death, I sat in my kitchen, still wearing the same clothes from the hospital, clutching his wedding ring in my trembling hands. The silence felt deafening. Every corner of our home whispered his name. Every photograph captured moments of our beautiful life together. When the doorbell rang, I hoped it might be someone offering comfort, perhaps a neighbor with casserole, or a friend with gentle words. Instead, Robert stood there with Brenda, their faces cold as winter stone, their eyes calculating and harsh. "We need to talk," Robert said, pushing past me into my own home without invitation. His voice carried none of the warmth I'd known for 25 years. Brenda followed her eyes, scanning our living room like she was appraising items at an estate sale, mentally calculating their worth. I tried to gather myself, smoothing my rumpled clothes. "Robert, I know we're both grieving, but don't." His hand shot up aggressively. "Don't you dare pretend this is about grief. Dad's gone, and now we handle things properly." My heart began to race with an unfamiliar dread. "What do you mean?" "The funeral arrangements, the finances, everything." Robert's voice grew harder with each word. "You won't be involved in any of it." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "I'm his wife, Robert. Of course I'll be involved." Brenda laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that filled our warm living room with ice. "Wife, you were his mistake, a lonely old man's poor judgment, nothing more." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath. "How can you say that I loved your father deeply? We built a beautiful life together." "Built a life." Robert's face contorted with rage, spittle flying as he spoke. "You're a gold digger, Marjorie. You stole him from our mother's memory. You have no humanity. You're a vile piece of trash, and you're losing your mind if you think you'll get a penny of his $500,000. I felt the room spinning around me. "Robert, please." "He left me with over $100,000 in personal debt I need to pay off," he screamed, his voice echoing through the house. "His medical bills, his gambling debts, all of it falls on me now. You contributed nothing but manipulation." Brenda stepped closer, her voice venomous and calculated. "Honestly, Marjorie, You're a disgrace to womanhood. Go crawl back into whatever hole you came from. You ruined our family the day you showed up. I tried to speak to explain the 25 years of shared life, the quiet mornings over coffee where we'd plan our day, the way Arthur would hold my hand during movies, how his face would light up when I walked into a room. Robert, I loved your father with everything I had. You know how much he cared for me. How can you say such cruel things, especially now when we should be supporting each other? Love. Robert spat his face twisted with disgust. You manipulated a grieving widower. You saw dollar signs and swooped in like a vulture. That's not love, that's predatory behavior. The cruelty was breathtaking in its intensity. Here I was, trying to process the devastating loss of my husband, and his own children were treating me like a criminal, like some stranger who'd invaded their lives. Later that afternoon, Mr. Thompson from Peaceful Rest Funeral Home arrived at my door. I'd known him professionally for years. We'd worked together on countless services, shared coffee at industry meetings, discussed the sacred nature of our work. But when he looked at me now, he couldn't meet my eyes. Mrs. Patterson, he said awkwardly, shifting his weight from foot to foot, I'm here about Arthur's arrangements. Of course, Richard. I'd like to discuss his service preferences. He always said, actually, he interrupted, his discomfort obvious. Robert has requested that all decisions go through him exclusively. As the son, he's taking the lead on this. My mouth fell open in shock. I'm his wife, his legal next of kin. Mr. Thompson shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. I understand your position, but Robert feels it's best if the family handles everything. He's very adamant about this. Best if what? My voice rose with disbelief. If I'm excluded from my own husband's funeral, I'm just following the family's wishes, he mumbled, then quickly excused himself, practically fleeing to his car. That evening, desperate for some normalcy in my shattered world, I went to the grocery store. But as I walked down the cereal aisle, I heard familiar voices whispering behind me. That's her, one of Arthur's cousins said to another, not bothering to lower her voice. The one who killed Arthur with her constant demands. I heard she was after his money all along, came the reply. Poor Arthur never saw it coming. She isolated him from his real family. My hands shook violently as I abandoned my cart and fled the store, my cheeks burning with humiliation. At home, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a letter from Mr. Davies Roberts' lawyer, full of legal jargon and veiled threats. The message was crystal clear: stay away from the funeral or face harassment charges. The next morning brought another devastating blow. Robert called to inform me that Arthur would be cremated immediately. No viewing, no wake. No chance for me to say goodbye to the man I'd loved for a quarter century. You have no right to see him, Robert said coldly, his voice devoid of any human warmth. He's ours now. He always was. As I hung up the phone with trembling hands, I realized the full scope of their calculated cruelty. They weren't just taking Arthur's money. They were stealing my right to grieve, to honor our love, to find any semblance of closure. They were systematically erasing me from his life, rewriting our history as if our 25 years together had been nothing but an elaborate con. I sat in our bedroom, surrounded by 25 years of precious memories, and felt something fundamental break inside me. But beneath the overwhelming devastation, a small flame of determination began to flicker. They thought they knew everything about Arthur and me, thought they could rewrite our love story with their lies. They were gravely mistaken. The vicious attacks intensified over the following days like a gathering storm. Robert and Brenda, emboldened by their initial success in isolating me, began spreading increasingly malicious lies throughout our small, tight-knit town. They claimed I had been emotionally abusive to Arthur, that I had systematically manipulated him into changing his will, that I had deliberately isolated him from his loving family. She's always been cold and calculating. I overheard Arthur's sister-in-law say loudly at the post office, clearly intending for me to hear. So controlling with Arthur's money even before his death, always hovering, never letting him make his own decisions. I always wondered about her true motives. The words cut deep because they were so fundamentally opposite to the truth of our relationship. But as I stood there invisible and shunned in my own community, a chilling realization washed over me like ice water. This coordinated character assassination wasn't just about money or inheritance. Robert and Brenda's attacks were rooted in decades of carefully hidden, simmering resentment. They had always seen me as an outsider, an intruder in their family narrative, someone who had stolen their father's affection. Now, with Arthur gone and unable to defend me, they were free to rewrite history completely. In the quiet solitude of my home, surrounded by the deafening silence of Arthur's absence, I found myself reflecting on a devastating secret I'd carried for over 2 decades, a secret that made their accusations of greed and manipulation unbearably cosmically ironic. Early in our marriage, during our 3rd year together, Arthur had come to me one night, broken and terrified, his strong hands shaking as he held a letter. He'd confessed to something that could have destroyed everything we'd built years earlier. In a moment of desperate financial pressure, he'd embezzled $75,000 from his previous employer to cover his first wife's cancer treatments. The weight of that secret had been crushing him for years, and he lived in constant paralyzing fear that it would be discovered and destroy not only him, but his children's futures. I remember holding him as he wept like a broken child, feeling his shame and terror seep into my very bones. Without hesitation, without a moment's consideration for my own financial security, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. Using my life savings money, I'd carefully, painstakingly accumulated over years of hard work as a funeral director. I paid back every single penny. I meticulously created a paper trail that made it look like Arthur had discovered the discrepancy himself and was voluntarily making comprehensive restitution. I crafted an elaborate story that painted him as the hero who discovered and corrected an accounting error, not the desperate man who'd stolen to save his dying wife. It cost me everything I'd saved for my retirement, but I did it out of pure selfless love. I protected his reputation, his relationship with Robert and Brenda, his standing in the community. Arthur never knew the full extent of what I'd sacrificed. I let him believe his former employer had simply accepted partial payments over time, that his confession had led to a manageable resolution. For 20 years, I'd kept that devastating secret, watching Arthur slowly rebuild his confidence and self-worth. I'd never asked for recognition or gratitude or even acknowledgement. I'd simply loved him enough to sacrifice everything for his peace of mind and his family's future. Now, as Robert screamed about my supposed greed, as Brenda called me a manipulator and a gold digger, the irony was suffocating in its cruelty. The woman they painted as money-hungry had actually given up her life savings to save their father's reputation. When I tried to hint at Arthur's past struggles to gently suggest that perhaps they didn't know everything about their father's complex character and the challenges he'd faced, Robert exploded with volcanic fury. "You're lying through your teeth. You're trying to cover your tracks. You evil gold digger. You have no humanity. You were always a bitter, cold woman who poisoned everything she touched." Brenda nodded viciously, her eyes gleaming with malice. Arthur was a good, honorable man. You're trying to destroy his memory. Now that he can't defend himself, that's exactly the kind of despicable behavior we'd expect from you. Even Arthur's extended family turned against me with shocking swiftness. At church, they literally stood up and moved away when I sat in my usual pew, the same pew where Arthur and I had worshiped together for 25 years. The whispers followed me everywhere, like a toxic cloud. That woman who killed Arthur and tried to steal his money. Then came Mr. Davies's proposed solution. He scheduled a formal meeting in his imposing office and laid out his proposal with the supreme confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. Here's what we're prepared to offer, he said, smoothly sliding official documents across his mahogany table. You sign over the entire $500,000 life insurance policy to Robert and Brenda as Arthur's rightful children. You publicly confess to mismanagement of Arthur's finances and acknowledge your inappropriate influence over him. In return, Brenda graciously agrees not to file a criminal complaint for elder abuse. I stared at the documents, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Elder abuse, emotional manipulation, financial exploitation, isolation from family. He recited smoothly as if reading from a legal textbook. We have multiple witnesses who will testify to your controlling possessive behavior patterns. The threat was crystal clear and utterly devastating. Confess to horrible crimes I didn't commit or face criminal charges based on completely manufactured evidence. They wanted to strip me of my inheritance, my reputation, and my dignity in one perfectly orchestrated legal maneuver. As I walked home from that meeting, my legs barely supporting me, I felt a profound shift taking place deep inside me. The grief was still there, raw and overwhelming, like an open wound. But alongside it grew something else, a cold, righteous anger that burned with the intensity of molten steel. They thought they could rewrite history, paint me as the villain in our beautiful love story. They thought they could destroy Arthur's true legacy and replace it with their calculated lies. They were dangerously, catastrophically wrong. The final crushing blow came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I was in my garden, tenderly caring for the roses Arthur had planted for our 10th anniversary, when the sheriff's car pulled into our driveway. My hands shook violently as I read the official restraining order, each word feeling like a nail in my coffin. Brenda had sworn before a judge that I posed a serious threat to her family's safety and well-being. She'd claimed I'd been systematically harassing them, making threatening phone calls at all hours, even showing up at their homes uninvited and making menacing statements. Every single word was a calculated, malicious lie, but the legal document in my trembling hands made it devastatingly real. Ma'am, you're prohibited from any contact whatsoever with Robert or Brenda Patterson, the sheriff explained with professional detachment. You cannot attend the funeral, approach their residences, or communicate with them in any way. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. I felt my knees buckle beneath me. I'm Arthur's wife. I have a legal right to attend his funeral. I'm sorry, ma'am. The court order is clear and legally binding. That afternoon, I watched from my bedroom window as Arthur's casket was loaded into the hearse with heartbreaking finality. I pressed my face against the cold glass, desperate for one last glimpse, one final goodbye to the man who'd been my world for 25 years. But I was legally barred from even stepping outside my own home. Robert stood beside the hearse, and when he spotted me at the window, his face contorted with rage. He marched to my front door and pounded on it with his fists. "He's ours now," he screamed through the wood, his voice echoing through the neighborhood. "You have no right here, you monster. You destroyed him, and now you're trying to destroy his memory." The funeral procession drove slowly past my house, and I collapsed on my kitchen floor, sobbing until no more tears would come. In that moment of absolute desolation, I understood the profound, calculated cruelty of their plan. They hadn't just stolen Arthur's money, they'd stolen my right to mourn, to find closure, to honor our love in the sacred ritual of farewell. Hours later, my phone buzzed with a text from Brenda that felt like a dagger to my heart. "Consider this closed, Marjorie. You lose completely. Arthur is at peace now, and his memory is safe from your poison. Don't contact us again. Ever. You're losing your mind if you think you can win this war." But the cruelest blow was yet to come, arriving like a final thunderclap in my personal storm. 2 days later, another sheriff arrived, this time with foreclosure papers that spelled out my complete financial ruin. Arthur's gambling debts, carefully hidden from me throughout our entire marriage, totaled a staggering $800,000. The bank was seizing our home, our sanctuary, everything we'd built together. Sitting in my empty living room, surrounded by boxes of precious memories and a lifetime of love, I felt the overwhelming weight of a secret so devastating that I'd hidden it even from myself. A secret that had tormented my every waking moment for months. Arthur hadn't died from a sudden stroke, as everyone believed, and as I'd let them believe. He'd been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4 aggressive terminal. The doctors had given him 3 months to live, maybe less, but Arthur couldn't face it. He couldn't bear the thought of becoming a burden, of watching helplessly as medical bills destroyed our family's financial future, of putting Robert and Brenda through the agony of watching him waste away. On that final morning, I'd found him in his study with an empty bottle of sleeping pills beside his chair. He'd left me a heartbreaking note explaining everything, the cancer diagnosis he'd hidden from everyone, the mounting gambling debts he'd accumulated trying to win enough money to pay for treatment, his carefully considered decision to end his suffering on his own terms rather than drag his family through months of pain and financial devastation. Out of love so deep it defied rational thought, out of a desperate, overwhelming need to protect him even in death, I'd hidden the devastating truth from everyone. I'd called 911 and told them I'd found him collapsed in his chair. I'd hidden the suicide note, disposed of the pill bottle, and let the entire world believe he'd died peacefully in his sleep from a sudden stroke. I'd protected Robert and Brenda from the soul-crushing truth about their father's final desperate moments. I'd preserved Arthur's dignity, his reputation, his legacy in their eyes, and in the community's memory. I'd carried the weight of that unbearable secret completely alone, tormented by the knowledge that I could have saved him if I'd only discovered his illness sooner, if I'd only paid closer attention to the signs. Now, as they systematically destroyed me with their lies and legal maneuvers, as they painted me as the heartless villain in our love story, I realized the cosmic crushing irony of it all. The woman they called cold and heartless had hidden their father's darkest secret out of pure, selfless love. The woman they called a gold digger had sacrificed everything, her savings, her peace of mind, her future security to protect his memory and their emotional well-being. They thought they knew the truth about Arthur, and me thought they understood the dynamics of our relationship. They knew absolutely nothing about the depth of our love or the extent of my sacrifices. As I sat in that empty house, facing homelessness and complete public humiliation, I felt something fundamental harden inside me, like steel being forged in fire. They'd pushed me to the very edge of human endurance, stripped away everything I held dear, trampled on my love and my grief. But in their arrogance and cruelty, they'd made one crucial, fatal mistake. They'd underestimated a woman who'd spent 40 years helping families navigate their darkest hours, who understood the legal system inside and out, who knew how to document truth and preserve evidence, who had spent a lifetime protecting the dignity of the dead and the rights of the grieving. I reached for my phone with steady hands and dialed my pastor's number. Reverend Matthews had been a retired judge before answering his calling to ministry. It was finally time to honor Arthur's true legacy and reclaim my own rightful place in this world. The call to Reverend Matthews would have to wait. In the days that followed, I discovered that Robert and Brenda's campaign of destruction had only just begun. They had systematically poisoned every aspect of my existence, turning my past into a weapon against me and my professional reputation into evidence of my supposed instability. The psychological prison they'd constructed around me was more suffocating than any physical bars. Every morning I woke to the crushing weight of Arthur's hidden truth, the suicide note I'd destroyed, the real circumstances of his death that I'd concealed out of love. Now, combined with Robert and Brenda's public accusations of abuse and gold digging, this secret became a source of constant torment. The very compassion that had defined my 40-year career as a funeral director, helping families navigate their darkest hours with dignity, now felt twisted and corrupted by the lies surrounding me. I found myself questioning everything. Had I been wrong to hide Arthur's suicide? Was protecting his memory worth this agony? The weight of carrying that secret while being publicly branded a monster eroded my sense of reality. Some nights, I lay awake wondering if I truly was the villain they painted me to be. Then came the professional assassination. Mr. Davies, with surgical precision, began leaking carefully crafted details about my erratic behavior to funeral director associations and hospice networks throughout the state. He painted a picture of a woman experiencing cognitive decline, someone with unstable emotional attachments to clients who could no longer be trusted with sensitive matters. We have concerns about Mrs. Patterson's recent behavior patterns. I heard he'd told the State Funeral Directors Association. There are questions about her emotional stability and professional judgment during this difficult time. The response was swift and devastating. Quiet cancellations from industry groups where I'd been a respected member for decades. Former colleagues who suddenly couldn't return my calls. The Compassionate Care Network, where I'd volunteered for 15 years, helping grieving families, sent a formal letter requesting I take a temporary leave to focus on my personal healing. Each rejection felt like another nail in my professional coffin. The woman who had once been sought out for her expertise in grief counseling was now whispered about as a cautionary tale of what happens when grief destroys judgment. The financial noose tightened daily. Legal fees from defending myself against their constant slander drained what little savings I had left. When I tried to access my accounts, I discovered Robert had somehow managed to freeze them, claiming I was mentally incompetent to manage my finances. The mounting costs of fighting his frivolous lawsuits, combined with Arthur's hidden debts, pushed me toward complete bankruptcy. The eviction notice came on a gray Thursday morning. The bank had foreclosed on our home, the sanctuary, where Arthur and I had built our life together. I watched helplessly as strangers appraised our furniture, our photographs, our memories, preparing everything for public auction. Standing in our empty bedroom, I felt my legs give way. This wasn't just about losing a house. It was about losing the last physical evidence that Arthur and I had ever existed as a couple. Soon, even these walls wouldn't remember our love. The auction was deliberately publicized. I stood across the street, hidden behind a tree, watching strangers paw through our belongings. Arthur's favorite chair, the china we'd used for every anniversary dinner, the quilt his grandmother had made, all sold to the highest bidder. Robert and Brenda didn't attend, but their absence spoke volumes. They were content to let strangers profit from our pain. Within a week, I was homeless, carrying my few remaining possessions in garbage bags to a crowded public shelter. The woman who had once owned a beautiful home, who had commanded respect in her community, was now just another face in a sea of societies forgotten. But the cruelest blow was yet to come. Robert and Brenda had one more weapon in their arsenal, one that would shatter my heart completely. They organized a public relations event for a local Family Harmony charity, supposedly focused on grief support. The local newspaper was invited along with community leaders. The real purpose, I would soon discover, was to deliver the final devastating blow to my spirit. Ethan, now 16 and tall like his grandfather, stood at a podium reading from prepared remarks about navigating difficult family relationships and moving beyond bitterness. His words were carefully crafted to sound mature and healing, but the subtext was clear. I was the source of family discord, the bitter old woman who couldn't accept reality. Sometimes, he said, his young voice carrying across the room, we have to make hard choices about who truly belongs in our family circle. Forgiveness doesn't always mean acceptance. Watching from the back of the room, I felt my heart breaking. This was the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle, who used to run to me for comfort when he scraped his knees. Now he stood there publicly rejecting me with words someone else had put in his mouth. Chloe's contribution was even more devastating in its calculated innocence. She presented a drawing of a happy family stick figures labeled with everyone's names except mine. When asked about it by the reporter, she giggled and said, "This is our real family, the people who matter." The newspaper article the next day featured a photo of Robert and Brenda with the children, all of them smiling under a headline about family resilience in times of loss. I wasn't mentioned by name, but anyone who knew our situation would understand exactly who the difficult family member was that they'd courageously moved beyond. That night, sitting on my narrow cot in the shelter, I seriously considered giving up. What was the point of fighting when even the children I'd loved as my own had been turned against me? Maybe it would be easier to simply disappear to let Robert and Brenda have their victory and their money. Then my phone rang. The voice on the other end was elderly, but strong, touched with an accent I remembered from decades past. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Eleanor Whitfield. You probably don't remember me, but you helped my family through my husband's funeral in 1998. I did remember. Mr. Whitfield had been a veteran who died suddenly, leaving Mrs. Whitfield confused and overwhelmed by the arrangements. I'd spent hours with her, helping her understand the process, even driving her to select his headstone when her children couldn't take time off work. I've been following what they're doing to you in the news." She continued, her voice fierce with indignation. "It's a disgrace. That's not the woman who held my hand when I thought I couldn't go on." Through tears, she told me she'd been following my story, horrified by the public character assassination. She'd contacted other families I'd helped over the years, and together they'd raised money to help me fight back. "We know who you really are," she said, "and we're not going to let them destroy you." More importantly, she'd connected with a network of retired legal professionals who specialized in elder fraud and defamation cases. They were willing to take my case to help me expose the truth about Robert and Brenda's conspiracy. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't completely alone. The families I'd served with compassion and dignity remembered, and they were willing to stand with me. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: determination. Robert and Brenda thought they destroyed me, completely stripped away everything that mattered. but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated the power of genuine gratitude, the loyalty of people who'd been touched by authentic compassion. The war wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. 3 weeks after I'd been reduced to living in the shelter, Robert and Brenda unveiled their masterpiece of manipulation, a highly publicized, dignified remembrance ceremony for Arthur. The irony wasn't lost on me that they were holding this elaborate memorial after denying me the right to attend his actual funeral. The event was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at the Grand Ballroom of the Riverside Conference Center, complete with professional photographers and local media coverage. I learned about it the way I learned about most things concerning my former life now, through the kindness of strangers who thought I should know. Mrs. Patterson from the shelter, we shared a last name, but no relation, had seen the announcement in the newspaper and brought it to me with gentle sympathy. "Honey," she said, her weathered hands touching mine, "I think you need to see this." The full-page announcement in the Sunday Life section featured a carefully selected photograph of Arthur from 20 years ago, standing alone in his garden. The caption read, "Community Leader Arthur Patterson to be honored in memorial celebration." No mention of me, his wife of 25 years. I had been erased from his story as completely as if I'd never existed. Unable to attend but desperate to witness this final insult, I made my way to the public library that Saturday afternoon. On a computer in the back corner, I accessed the live stream that Brenda had arranged, promoted as a way for all those whose lives Arthur touched to participate. What I saw was a carefully orchestrated theater of lies. The ballroom was beautifully decorated with white roses and professional displays featuring photographs spanning Arthur's life. But as I studied each image with growing horror, I realized what they'd done. Every photo that included me had been cropped or digitally edited to remove my presence. Pictures from our wedding, our anniversaries, our vacations, all carefully altered to present Arthur as a widower who'd lived alone after his first wife's death. Robert stood at the podium in a dark suit, the picture of a grieving son. His voice carried across the room with practiced emotion as he spoke about his father's dedication to his true family and his sacrifices for those he genuinely loved. "My father," Robert said, his voice catching just enough to seem authentic, "was a man who always put family first. He understood the difference between blood bonds and temporary relationships. Even in his final years, when his judgment may have been clouded by loneliness, his heart remained with those who truly mattered." The audience murmured sympathetically. These were people who'd known Arthur, who'd seen us together at community events, yet they sat there nodding as Robert rewrote our history. Brenda's contribution was even more insidious. She spoke about protecting Arthur's legacy from those who would exploit it, and the importance of recognizing authentic family bonds. Her words were carefully chosen to sound noble while delivering poisonous implications about my character. "True love," she said, looking directly into the camera, "doesn't seek to profit from death. True family doesn't abandon their responsibilities when things become difficult." My father knew the difference, even if he was too kind to say so publicly. But it was the children's participation that truly broke my heart. A large screen descended, showing a pre-recorded video message from Ethan. Now 16, he looked so much like Arthur at that age that seeing him was physically painful. He spoke about his renewed appreciation for genuine family relationships and his commitment to honoring Grandpa's real values. "Grandpa taught me that family isn't just about who's around at the end," Ethan said, his young voice steady and sure. "It's about who was there through the real struggles, who shared the real history. Some people only show up when there's something to gain." The words were clearly scripted, but Ethan delivered them with conviction. This was the boy I'd helped with homework who'd fallen asleep on my lap during family movie nights. Now he was publicly disavowing me without even saying my name. Chloe's segment was shorter, but equally devastating. The 14-year-old giggled as she held up memorial programs from various family funerals, saying, "Grandma Marjorie used to plan these old-fashioned ceremonies, but we wanted something more authentic for Grandpa, something that really honored who he was." The implication was clear. My professional expertise was outdated, artificial, unsuited to honoring Arthur's authentic memory. They'd turned my life's work into evidence of my inadequacy. As the ceremony continued, I found myself gripping the edges of the library computer desk, my knuckles white with suppressed rage. They weren't just erasing me from Arthur's life, they were systematically destroying my professional legacy, painting my decades of compassionate service as somehow manipulative or self-serving. Robert's final speech drove the knife deeper. He presented himself as a devoted son who protected his father's true legacy, subtly mocking what he called my intrusive guidance during Arthur's vulnerable final years. "Sometimes," he said, looking directly into the camera with Arthur's own blue eyes, "the greatest act of love is knowing when to step back, when to let real family handle family matters." My father deserved that respect in his final years. The audience gave him a standing ovation. As I sat in that quiet library corner, watching my stepchildren smile and accept condolences for their dignified tribute, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just about money or inheritance anymore. This was about the complete destruction of truth, the systematic erasure of authentic love from the record of Arthur's life. But then as I was preparing to leave, something unexpected happened. The camera panned across the audience, and I recognized a face that made my heart skip. Dr. Margaret Chen, a respected retired funeral director who'd been my mentor in the early years of my career. Dr. Chen wasn't applauding. She sat with her arms crossed, her expression troubled as she watched the proceedings. When Robert spoke about my outdated methods, I saw her shake her head slightly. When Brenda talked about authentic family bonds, Dr. Chen's frown deepened. As the ceremony ended and people began mingling, I watched Dr. Chen approach one of the photographers. She spoke to him briefly, then pulled out her phone. Whatever she was doing, it looked important. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "Marjorie, this is Margaret Chen. I just witnessed the most disgusting display of manipulation I've ever seen in 40 years of helping families honor their dead." Her voice was sharp with professional outrage. "What they did today, twisting your compassionate service into something sinister, it's an insult to everything we've dedicated our lives to. I've contacted Judge Matthews. We need to talk." As I walked back to the shelter through the growing dusk, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, the support of someone who truly understood what had been done to me. Robert and Brenda thought they'd delivered the final blow to my reputation and my spirit. They'd miscalculated. In their arrogance, they'd gone too far, and finally someone with the professional standing to challenge them had witnessed their lies firsthand. The real fight was about to begin. The final financial assault began exactly 1 week after their memorial ceremony, as if Robert and Brenda had been waiting to savor their public triumph before delivering the killing blow. I should have known their cruelty had deeper reserves. The lawsuit papers arrived at the shelter on a Monday morning, delivered by a process server who looked embarrassed to be serving legal documents to a homeless woman. The thick manila envelope contained a complaint that took my breath away. Robert was suing me for $1 million for emotional distress, defamation of character, and intentional infliction of suffering. According to the documents, my harassment and false accusations had caused him severe psychological trauma. My erratic behavior following Arthur's death had damaged his reputation in the community. Most grotesquely, he claimed that my mismanagement of Arthur's final years had contributed to his death, making me liable for wrongful death damages. Every word was a carefully crafted lie, but lies presented in legal language with the weight of the court system behind them. The message was clear. Even if I somehow survived their previous attacks, the cost of defending myself against this frivolous lawsuit would finish me completely. But they weren't finished. The same afternoon, I received a call from Patricia Rodriguez, the administrator of my retirement fund, from the Funeral Directors Association. "Marjorie, I'm so sorry to have to tell you this," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "We've received formal complaints about your professional conduct. There are allegations of financial impropriety and questions about your mental competence." My hands began shaking. "What kind of allegations?" "Someone has filed a report claiming you've shown signs of cognitive decline, that you've been making inappropriate decisions regarding client services. They're saying you've been unstable in your interactions with grieving families." I knew immediately who someone was. Robert had somehow convinced them I was mentally unfit, using my grief and his twisted version of recent events as evidence. Without a proper investigation, Patricia continued, "We're required to suspend your pension payments pending review. I'm sorry, Marjorie, my hands are tied." The line went dead, and with it my last source of income. The monthly pension that had been my lifeline earned through 4 decades of dedicated service was gone. Robert had managed to convince my own professional association that I was incompetent. The dominoes continued falling throughout the week. My health insurance tied to my pension was canceled. The small storage unit where I'd placed Arthur's remaining personal belongings, things too precious to sell, was seized for non-payment. Even my membership in the local church was quietly revoked after someone complained about my disruptive presence during services. The final humiliation came on Friday. The shelter administrator, Mrs. Davidson, called me into her office with obvious discomfort. "Marjorie, I've received some concerning phone calls about your situation. Someone has raised questions about whether this facility is appropriate for someone with your background, my background. There are suggestions that you might be, well, dangerous, that you've harassed family members, that there might be mental health issues that require specialized care." I stared at her in disbelief. "Mrs. Davidson, you've known me for months. Have I ever shown any signs of being dangerous?" She looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "It's not about what I think. It's about liability. The board has decided it's best if you find alternative arrangements." Alternative arrangements. I was being evicted from a homeless shelter. That weekend, I found myself on the street with 2 garbage bags containing everything I owned. The woman who had once owned a beautiful home, who had commanded respect in her community, was now truly destitute without shelter, income, or hope. But Robert and Brenda weren't satisfied with merely destroying me. They wanted to celebrate their victory publicly. The newspaper article appeared the following Tuesday, complete with a color photograph that made my blood freeze. It showed Brenda standing beside a massive ornate memorial fountain in the town square with a brass plaque reading, "In memory of Arthur Patterson, beloved father and community leader, donated by his loving children." The fountain was breathtaking, clearly expensive with intricate stonework and professional landscaping. According to the article, it had cost $50,000 and had been funded entirely by Robert and Brenda as a tribute to their father's legacy. $50,000. Money that had come from Arthur's life insurance policy money that should have been mine, that Arthur had intended for my security. They'd taken my inheritance and turned it into a monument to their own supposed virtue, a permanent public symbol of their victory over me. The article quoted Brenda extensively about her commitment to honoring family values and Robert's wisdom in managing family resources responsibly. There was even a photo of them with the mayor, who praised their generous contribution to the community. Reading that article while sitting on a park bench, my few possessions in bags at my feet, I felt something break inside me that I hadn't known was still whole. They hadn't just stolen my money, they'd transformed it into a public celebration of my destruction. The stress of constant worry, inadequate nutrition, and sleeping outdoors began taking its toll on my 65-year-old body. My chest pains, which had started as occasional twinges, became a constant frightening pressure. My hands shook uncontrollably, and I found myself dizzy and disoriented more often than not. The heart attack came on a Tuesday morning while I was walking to the library. One moment I was crossing the street, the next, I was lying on the pavement, my vision going dark as strangers shouted for help. I woke up in the cardiac intensive care unit, connected to machines that beeped and whirred around me. A kind-faced nurse named Elena explained that I'd suffered a massive heart attack, that I'd been unconscious for 2 days. "You're lucky to be alive," she said gently. "Your heart was under tremendous stress. The doctors say it's probably been building for months." As I lay there weak and alone, I drifted in and out of consciousness. In those hazy moments between sleep and waking, memories surfaced that I'd buried deep in my mind. I remembered a conversation with Arthur from years ago, late one night when he couldn't sleep. He'd been agitated, pacing our bedroom while I lay in bed. "Marjorie," he'd said, his voice heavy with worry, "I need to tell you something about the investment property in Florida. I made some decisions that weren't smart. If anything happens to me, there might be debts that could cause problems." At the time, I'd thought he was just worrying unnecessarily. Arthur often fretted about financial security, especially late at night. I'd comforted him, told him we'd face whatever came together. Now, lying in that hospital bed, I realized Arthur had been trying to warn me about more than just debts. He'd been carrying secrets, financial burdens that he'd hidden from everyone, including Robert and Brenda. The gambling debts they'd used to justify seizing our home might not have been the whole story. If Arthur had been hiding other debts, other financial problems, then Robert and Brenda's claims about his estate might be built on incomplete information. They might not know the full extent of what Arthur had been dealing with. As that realization sank in, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not the desperate hope of a drowning woman, but the determined hope of someone who just remembered she still had one card left to play. Arthur had kept meticulous financial records. If those records still existed, if I could find them, they might contain evidence that would change everything. My fight wasn't over. In fact, it might just be beginning. The cardiac ward became my unlikely war room. As my strength slowly returned over the following days, I found myself driven by a clarity I hadn't felt since Arthur's death. The near-fatal heart attack had stripped away my fear. What more could they do to me that they hadn't already done? Elena, my primary nurse, had become an unexpected ally. During her quiet night shifts, she'd listen as I told her the truth about Robert and Brenda's systematic destruction of my life. Unlike everyone else, she believed me. "I've seen families destroy each other over money before," she said one evening while checking my vitals. "But what they've done to you, it's evil, pure evil." It was Elena who helped me access the hospital's recording equipment, ostensibly for therapeutic purposes. In reality, I was preparing for what I knew would be my final chance to tell the truth. The video message I recorded was raw and unfiltered. Sitting in my hospital bed, still connected to heart monitors, I spoke directly to the camera with the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. My name is Marjorie Patterson, and I am the widow of Arthur Patterson. For months, his children have systematically destroyed my life with lies, stolen my inheritance, and erased me from his memory. But I have proof of what they've done. I played the audio recordings I'd made during those first horrible days after Arthur's death, conversations I'd secretly recorded on my phone when I'd sensed something was wrong. Robert's voice came through clearly boasting about getting Dad's money and calling me a stupid old woman who won't know what hit her. Brenda could be heard laughing in the background saying, "She'll be lucky if we don't have her committed." In the video, I also carefully referenced Arthur's hidden financial struggles without revealing the full truth about his suicide. Arthur carried burdens that his children never knew about, I said, looking directly into the camera. Financial pressures that would have destroyed their image of him. I protected that secret, just as I protected them from so many painful truths. This is how they repay that loyalty. The recording was devastating in its quiet authority. No screaming, no dramatic accusations, just a dying woman telling the truth with irrefutable evidence. Elena helped me upload the video to a secure server and prepare it for delivery to Robert. My plan was simple: give him one last chance to do the right thing, to choose truth over greed. Perhaps seeing his own words played back, hearing the cruelty in his voice, would finally reach whatever conscience he might still possess. But I had underestimated Brenda's paranoia and her network of allies. Through methods I would later discover involved bribing hospital staff, Brenda had been monitoring my communications. The maintenance worker who emptied my room's trash, the aide who brought my meals, she'd turned them into spies, paying them to report on my activities and intercept any messages I tried to send. When Elena attempted to deliver my video message to Robert, it never reached him. Instead, it went directly to Brenda, who immediately recognized its devastating potential. What happened next was a masterpiece of manipulation that revealed the true depth of her cunning. Within hours, Brenda had taken my raw, honest video and subjected it to sophisticated digital editing. She altered the audio to change my tone, making my voice sound more aggressive and unhinged. She spliced together sentences to create statements I'd never made, added ominous background music, and inserted reaction shots that made my pauses seem paranoid rather than thoughtful. Most insidiously, she completely removed the audio evidence of Robert and her own damning statements, replacing them with distorted noise that she claimed was unintelligible rambling, proving my mental instability. The final product bore no resemblance to my original message. Instead of a dying woman's truthful testimony, it appeared to be the paranoid delusions of someone suffering from severe mental illness. Brenda then sold this fabricated video to National Insider, a tabloid television show known for sensationalizing family dramas. She presented herself as a concerned family member trying to help a deeply disturbed stepmother who was harassing the family with wild accusations. The segment aired on a Thursday evening during prime time, reaching millions of viewers. The host introduced it with breathless sensationalism. Tonight, an exclusive investigation into a family torn apart by greed, delusion, and a dying woman's desperate attempt to destroy her stepchildren's lives. The doctored video was presented as evidence of my deteriorating mental state and my cruel attempts to defame a deceased man's reputation. Expert commentary from a psychiatrist who'd never met me analyzed my paranoid tendencies and grandiose delusions. But the cruelest blow came when Robert appeared for a live interview immediately following the segment. Dressed in a somber suit and looking every inch the concerned family member, Robert spoke with practiced emotion about his stepmother's tragic decline. "It breaks my heart to see her like this," he said, his voice catching just enough to seem authentic. "Dad loved her, and we tried to help her through her grief, but she's become convinced that everyone is conspiring against her. The accusations she's making, they're not only false, they're hurtful to our family's healing process." The interviewer leaned forward sympathetically. "This must be incredibly difficult for your family." "It is," Robert nodded gravely, "especially for the children. My son Ethan is here with me tonight because he wanted people to understand how this has affected him." The camera panned to reveal Ethan sitting beside his father, looking mature and thoughtful beyond his 16 years. When asked about his grandmother's behavior, he spoke with carefully coached sincerity. "I love Grandma Marjorie," he said, his young voice steady. "But since Grandpa died, she's been different. She says things that aren't true, accuses us of things we'd never do. It's scary sometimes. We just want her to get the help she needs." The performance was flawless. Robert and Ethan came across as a loving family trying to deal with a difficult, mentally unstable relative. I was portrayed as a tragic figure whose grief had driven her to paranoid delusions and vindictive behavior. The segment ended with Robert making a public plea for privacy during this difficult time while expressing hope that I would accept the professional help being offered. Within hours, the story had gone viral. Social media exploded with commentary about the crazy stepmother and praise for Robert's patience and compassion. My name became a hashtag associated with cautionary tales about mental illness and family dysfunction. Lying in my hospital bed, watching my character be assassinated on national television, I felt a despair so profound it was almost peaceful. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance or destroyed my reputation locally. They'd made me a global symbol of delusional behavior. But even in that moment of utter defeat, a small part of me noticed something the general public couldn't see. Dr. Chen, my former mentor, was quoted in several online articles defending my professional competence. Judge Matthews had issued a statement questioning the rush to judgment in my case. Most importantly, I'd received a call from a lawyer named Sarah Morrison, who specialized in elder fraud cases. She'd watched the broadcast with a professional eye and noticed inconsistencies in the audio that suggested digital manipulation. "Mrs. Patterson," she'd said quietly, "I think we need to examine that video very carefully. What they've done to you may be criminal." As I closed my eyes that night, surrounded by the steady beeping of hospital machines, I held onto one crucial truth. Somewhere out there, the unedited version of my video still existed. The real evidence of Robert and Brenda's conspiracy was still waiting to be found. They thought they'd silenced me forever. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. Sarah Morrison proved to be everything I'd hoped for and more. Within days of our first conversation, she'd assembled a legal team that would have impressed Arthur himself, a retired federal judge, a forensic accountant who specialized in elder fraud, and Dr. Chen, who'd agreed to serve as an expert witness on my professional competence. The funding for this legal army came from an unexpected source. Years ago, I'd established a small emergency fund in a separate account that Arthur had encouraged me to maintain for just-in-case situations. It had grown quietly over the decades, forgotten in the chaos of recent months. When Sarah discovered it during her investigation, it provided exactly the resources we needed to fight back. The federal lawsuit we filed was comprehensive and devastating. Robert and Brenda were charged with criminal fraud, elder abuse conspiracy, and defamation. The charges carried serious prison time and massive financial penalties. More importantly, the case attracted global attention, partly because of their earlier media manipulation, and partly because it represented a perfect example of how sophisticated family fraud had become in the digital age. As we prepared for trial, Sarah's team uncovered evidence that stunned even me. Arthur's meticulous record-keeping, which Robert and Brenda had dismissed as an old man's obsession, proved to be their downfall. Hidden in a safe deposit box that only I knew about, we found Arthur's true will signed and notarized just 4 months before his death. But it was the audio recordings that would prove most devastating. Arthur had been more careful than I'd realized. Concerned about his children's increasing financial demands and their growing hostility toward me, he'd begun recording his conversations with his lawyer, his financial advisor, and even some family discussions. The recordings painted a clear picture of a man deeply disappointed in his children's greed and absolutely devoted to his wife. The trial began on a cold February morning, with media trucks lined up outside the courthouse and crowds of spectators hoping to witness what the press had dubbed the case of the stolen heart. I sat in the front row, my hands folded, wearing the navy blue dress Arthur had always said brought out my eyes. Robert and Brenda entered with their new legal team. Mr. Davies had been disbarred, pending criminal charges of his own. They looked confident, still believing their media campaign had permanently destroyed my credibility. That confidence lasted exactly 3 hours. When Sarah Morrison stood to present our evidence, the courtroom fell silent. She began with Arthur's will, reading it aloud in her clear, professional voice. To my beloved wife, Marjorie Patterson, she read, "I leave my entire estate, including all financial accounts, real property, and life insurance benefits, totaling approximately $500,000. Marjorie has brought immeasurable joy and peace to my life. She has always honored my life with her compassion, her wisdom, and her unwavering love. My children, Robert and Brenda, have shown themselves to be financially irresponsible and motivated primarily by greed. I trust Marjorie completely to manage my legacy with the dignity and care she has shown throughout our marriage." The will was ironclad, witnessed and notarized with Arthur's signature, verified by multiple handwriting experts. But it was the audio recordings that truly shattered Robert and Brenda's facade. Sarah played recording after recording of Arthur's conversations with his lawyer. In his own voice, warm and familiar, Arthur detailed his growing concern about his children's sense of entitlement and their cruel treatment of me. Most damaging was a conversation from just weeks before his death. "Mr. Patterson, are you certain about these provisions?" his lawyer had asked. "Absolutely certain," Arthur's voice replied clearly. "Robert and Brenda have made their feelings about Marjorie perfectly clear. They see her as an obstacle to their inheritance, not as a member of our family. I won't reward that cruelty. Marjorie has earned my love and my trust. Everything I have should go to her." The courtroom was absolutely silent as Arthur's voice filled the space, defending me from beyond the grave. I felt tears streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from the profound relief of finally hearing the truth acknowledged. When Robert was called to testify, the transformation was shocking. The confident, grieving son who had charmed television audiences was gone. faced with his father's actual words, his own recorded boasts about stealing my inheritance, and the ironclad evidence of his fraud, Robert simply broke. He began stammering, then weeping, then shaking uncontrollably on the witness stand. When the prosecutor asked him to explain his father's clear intentions in the will, Robert's facade shattered completely. I thought Dad didn't know what he was doing. He sobbed. She manipulated him. She had to have manipulated him. He loved us. He was supposed to love us more than her. The sight of him, this man who had systematically destroyed my life, completely broken by his own actions, was both heartbreaking and vindicating. This wasn't the calculated cruelty I'd expected. It was the desperate collapse of someone who had convinced himself his lies were truth. Brenda attempted to flee the courtroom during the lunch recess, but was apprehended in the parking garage. Her arrest was broadcast live on the same television networks that had amplified her lies about me. The sight of her in handcuffs, screaming about conspiracy theories and unfair treatment, completed the destruction of their public image. Arthur's extended family, who had filled several rows of the courtroom, sat in stunned silence as the truth unfolded. I watched their faces change from confusion to horror to profound shame as they realized the extent of Robert and Brenda's deception and their own complicity in my suffering. When the judge read the verdict finding Robert and Brenda guilty on all charges, the courtroom erupted. But I felt only a quiet, profound relief. Arthur's true voice had finally been heard. His real legacy, our love, our life together, had been restored. Justice had taken nearly 2 years to arrive, but it had arrived completely. The court's verdict was as comprehensive as it was decisive. Judge Harrison, a distinguished woman in her 60s, who had clearly been moved by the evidence, delivered the sentencing with gravity befitting the magnitude of the crimes. Robert received 12 years in federal prison for fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Brenda, identified as the primary architect of the media manipulation campaign, received 10 years. Both were ordered to pay complete restitution of the $500,000 they'd stolen, plus an additional $200,000 in punitive damages for emotional distress, and all of my legal fees, a total exceeding $800,000. Mr. Davies, their former attorney, received a 5-year sentence for conspiracy and was permanently disbarred. The forensic accountant had uncovered evidence that he'd helped them manipulate financial documents and had known their claims were fraudulent from the beginning. But the financial restoration, while crucial, meant less to me than the judge's formal statement vindicating my character. "Mrs. Patterson," Judge Harrison said, looking directly at me, "you have endured a campaign of cruelty and deception that represents elder abuse in its most insidious form. Your decades of service as a funeral director, your unwavering integrity, and your devotion to your late husband have been callously exploited by individuals who should have protected and honored you. This court formally recognizes that you are the victim of a calculated conspiracy designed to steal not only your inheritance, but your dignity and your very identity." She paused, her voice growing stronger. "Let this case serve as a warning that our legal system will not tolerate the abuse of elders, the desecration of memory, or the exploitation of grief for financial gain." Those words, delivered in open court, recorded for posterity broadcast, globally restored something I'd thought was lost forever, my good name. In the days following, the sentencing letters began arriving at my temporary apartment. Hundreds of them from families I'd served over the decades, from colleagues in the funeral industry, from strangers who'd followed the case and wanted to express their support. Each one was a balm to wounds I'd carried for so long. 3 weeks after the trial ended, Robert sent me a letter from prison. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, written in the shaky handwriting of someone whose world had completely collapsed. Dear Marjorie, it began, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I'm not sure I even deserve to hope for it. But I need you to know that I understand now what I've done, not just to you, but to Dad's memory, to our family, to everything that should have mattered. The letter rambled for 6 pages, a desperate outpouring of remorse and self-recrimination. He wrote about the therapy sessions in prison, about slowly realizing the depth of his father's disappointment in him, about the crushing weight of knowing he'd destroyed his own family out of greed. I convinced myself you were the enemy, he wrote, because it was easier than admitting that Dad chose you because you were worthy of his love in ways Brenda and I never were. I see that now. I see everything now, and I can't undo any of it. Reading his letter, I felt not triumph, but a profound sadness. This broken man was still Arthur's son, and Arthur would have been heartbroken to see what greed had done to him. Brenda, by contrast, remained defiant, even in prison. The few reports I received suggested she blamed everyone but herself, me, the legal system, even Robert, for not being strong enough to see it through. Her isolation was complete and self-imposed, a cautionary tale of what happens when malice consumes a person entirely. The most meaningful reconciliation came from Arthur's extended family. His sister Margaret was the first to approach me, appearing at my door one evening with tears in her eyes and a bouquet of Arthur's favorite flowers. Marjorie, she said, her voice breaking, I can't believe what we did to you. What we let them convince us was true. Arthur loved you so much, and we abandoned you when you needed us most. Over the following months, each of Arthur's relatives reached out, offering not just apologies, but genuine efforts to rebuild our relationships. They shared memories of Arthur that I'd never heard, spoke about how much happier he'd been after marrying me, and expressed shame at how easily they'd been manipulated by Robert and Brenda's lies. These conversations weren't easy, but they were healing. Slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild the family Arthur had always wanted us to be. The most difficult and most important reconciliation was with Ethan and Chloe. 18 months after their parents' imprisonment, they reached out through their court-appointed guardian, asking if they could see me. The meeting took place at a neutral location, a family counseling center, where they'd been receiving therapy to process the trauma of learning their parents were criminals, and their entire family narrative had been a lie. Ethan, now 17, and looking heartbreakingly like Arthur, could barely meet my eyes at first. Grandma Marjorie, he said quietly, I know I said terrible things about you. On TV at that ceremony, I didn't understand. They told me you were trying to hurt our family, and I believed them. Chloe, 15 now, and more mature than anyone should have to be at that age, added, we want to know the truth about you and Grandpa, the real truth, not what Mom and Dad told us. Over the course of several carefully supervised visits, I shared memories of their grandfather, the man who'd taught me to garden, who'd left me love notes in my lunch when I worked late, who'd worried constantly about being a good enough father and stepfather. I showed them photos from our travels, read them letters he'd written me, helped them understand that the man they'd lost was indeed wonderful and that he'd loved them deeply, even while being disappointed in their parents. The healing was slow and sometimes painful, but it was real. These children, manipulated and traumatized by their parents' crimes, began to see me not as an enemy, but as a connection to the grandfather they'd lost, and as someone who genuinely cared about their future. My victory was complete, but it was bittersweet. Arthur's children were in prison, their lives destroyed by their own choices. His extended family was struggling with guilt and shame. His grandchildren were in therapy, trying to rebuild their understanding of their own family. The truth had prevailed, but at such a tremendous cost. As I stood in the courthouse steps after the final sentencing hearing, surrounded by reporters and supporters, I felt not triumph, but a profound sadness for all the pain that could have been avoided if Robert and Brenda had simply chosen love over greed. Still, Arthur's voice had been heard. His true will, both legal and emotional, had been honored. And for the first time in almost 2 years, I could breathe freely, knowing that the world finally understood the truth about our love. 2 years after the trial ended, I stood in the garden Arthur had planted for our 10th anniversary, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The roses he'd chosen had grown wild during my time away, but careful tending had brought them back to glorious life. Like me, they'd survived the storm and emerged more beautiful than before. My home, our home, had been meticulously restored with the restitution money. Every room held memories that Robert and Brenda had tried to steal, but now those memories felt sacred again, protected by truth and honored by justice. The house was no longer a shrine to loss, but a celebration of love that had endured beyond death. My days had found a rhythm that filled me with purpose and peace. 3 mornings a week, I volunteered at Riverside Hospice, offering my decades of experience to families navigating their final goodbyes. The work felt like coming home, using my skills not for profit, but for comfort, helping others find dignity in their darkest hours. The director, a kind woman named Patricia, had told me that families specifically requested me. "You have something special," she said. "Maybe it's everything you've been through, but you help people feel less alone." Arthur's extended family had become the blessing I'd always hoped they would be. Margaret visited twice a week, and we'd spend hours in the garden sharing stories and planning family gatherings. His brother Tom had become my financial advisor, determined to protect me from ever being vulnerable again. His cousins included me in every holiday, every celebration, treating me not as Arthur's widow, but as their sister. The reconciliation with Ethan and Chloe had blossomed into something beautiful and unexpected. Ethan, now 19 and in college, called me every Sunday evening to share his week's adventures and ask for advice about everything from relationships to career choices. He'd chosen to major in social work, inspired, he said, by my advocacy for elder rights. "Grandma," he'd told me recently, "you taught me that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about showing up for each other, especially when it's hard." Chloe, 17, and preparing for college herself, had become my closest companion. She spent weekends at my house helping with the garden and listening to stories about her grandfather. She'd inherited Arthur's gentle nature and his sense of justice, often talking about becoming a lawyer to help families like ours. "You and Grandpa had real love," she said one afternoon as we planted new rose bushes. "Mom and Dad never understood that. They thought love was about getting things from people, not giving things to them." Robert continued to write from prison, and over time, his letters had evolved from desperate self-justification to genuine self-reflection. He was participating in therapy programs, working toward a college degree, and slowly accepting responsibility for his choices. While I couldn't envision a close relationship in the future, I'd reached a place of peace about his journey toward redemption. Brenda remained unrepentant and isolated, serving her sentence in bitter silence. I felt sorry for her, but I'd learned that some people choose their own prisons long before the law puts them there. My unexpected transformation into a national advocate for elder rights had given new meaning to my life. Sarah Morrison and I had founded the Arthur Patterson Foundation, providing legal assistance to elderly victims of family fraud. My story had become a beacon of hope for others facing similar betrayals. I'd written a memoir, Truth Beyond the Grave, which had become a bestseller and helped countless families recognize the warning signs of elder abuse. Speaking engagements took me across the country, where I met survivors who'd found strength in my story, and family members who'd learned to prioritize love over inheritance. The local community that had once shunned me now embraced me as a symbol of resilience and truth. The mayor had proclaimed Marjorie Patterson Day, dedicated to elder advocacy and family integrity. Children stopped me in the grocery store to say their grandparents talked about me, that my story had helped their families have important conversations about respect and care. But the most profound transformation was internal. The woman who had once defined herself through service to others had learned to value her own worth. The woman who had kept devastating secrets to protect others had found the courage to speak truth, no matter how painful. Standing in Arthur's garden on this peaceful morning, I felt his presence not as a ghost haunting my memories, but as a warm assurance that love transcends death. That truth ultimately prevails, and that a life lived with integrity leaves ripples that touch generations. I was 70 now, with silver hair and laugh lines that spoke of joy rediscovered. My house was filled with laughter again, Arthur's family chosen friends, the young people I mentored through my foundation. My calendar was full of meaningful work, cherished relationships, and quiet moments of gratitude. Robert and Brenda had tried to steal my identity, my inheritance, and my legacy. Instead, they'd given me something I'd never expected, the chance to discover who I truly was when everything else was stripped away. They'd revealed a strength I didn't know I possessed and a purpose I'd never imagined. The woman who had once hidden painful truths to protect others had become someone who spoke difficult truths to heal the world. The widow who had nearly died of heartbreak had learned that the heart's capacity for love and forgiveness is infinite. I was no longer just Arthur's widow or Robert's stepmother or a victim of family fraud. I was Marjorie Patterson, advocate, survivor, mentor, friend. I was a woman who had faced the worst humanity could offer and had chosen to respond with grace, wisdom, and an unshakable commitment to truth. In losing everything, I had found myself. In fighting for justice, I had discovered purpose. In choosing forgiveness over bitterness, I had found peace. This was not the life I had planned, but it was the life I was meant to live. Years have passed since that terrible time when I thought my world had ended, and I can honestly say that my life today radiates an unshakable inner peace, hard-won through immense adversity. My cherished home, once threatened with foreclosure and loss, is now a sanctuary of vibrant life, frequently filled with the laughter of Arthur's extended family and my dear grandchildren. Our bonds, rebuilt on honesty, respect, and deep affection, are stronger than they ever were before the crisis. I've become a revered figure in the national conversation about elder rights. My story serving as a beacon of hope for countless others fighting for dignity in their later years. My days are rich with newfound passions, the quiet joy of my hard-won independence, the profound contentment of a life truly lived on my own terms, free from manipulation and fear. Through my foundation, my writing, and my speaking engagements, I've transformed my deepest pain into lasting purpose. Looking back on my arduous journey, I understand now that my greatest strength lay not in silent endurance, but in courageously reclaiming my narrative and fighting for my autonomy and the rights of others. I learned that self-worth is an unshakable foundation, and that true family is built on love and respect, not greed or manipulation. I carry no bitterness toward Robert and Brenda, only a profound wisdom gained from transforming my deepest pain into a force for healing in the world. This story is a testament to the insidious nature of elder abuse and familial manipulation, but more importantly, it's proof of the profound courage it takes for a survivor to fight for their fundamental rights and dignity. It demonstrates that truth will ultimately prevail, that autonomy can be reclaimed even after profound betrayal, and that a life of purpose and authentic connection is always possible. To anyone facing similar battles, know this: your spirit of resilience and dignity can triumph over even the most ruthless greed. Your voice matters, your truth matters, and you are never too old to reclaim your life and write a new chapter filled with peace, purpose, and genuine love.